Hello everyone, welcome back to another video on the JayBee Milly channel. I am JayBee and I've just finished watching episode 7 of HBO Max's Velma show. And there is, of course, as usual, a lot that I have to say about it. But before we get started, if this is the first video you're watching from us, please do consider subscribing. Even if you're not a fan of the Velma series, we have a back catalogue of over 70 interviews with people that have worked in the Scooby franchise, and there's a really special one coming up for our 75th interview anniversary, so we do hope that you stick around for that. But bear in mind that we are going to go into some maybe mild plot points, but we're going to stay relatively spoiler free with this. However, if you don't want any risk of spoilers whatsoever, I recommend going to watch the 7th episode for yourself and then maybe coming back and sharing your thoughts in the comment section down below. But without further ado, let's get started with our first impressions. First and foremost, I am pleased to say that I didn't go into this with any type of prejudice or any type of ill will. You know, when we left the last 2 batches of episodes, I felt very nothing towards this show. Like, at first it was unusual, then it was outrageous, and I found last week it was just status quo. What was shocking was expected, what was out there was the status quo. But with this time, I kind of feel like it did a lot, or at least enough, let's not say a lot, it did enough to revamp my interest in the mystery. Although it was a cheap way of doing it, I think the way they've set things up, whenever things do happen that's ordinary but not, I kind of get a bit intrigued. Now, going into that, if you've watched the episode, you'll know that Velma comes into her house to find a display, to say the very least, and instantly I was thinking in my mind, that's different to all the others. Maybe that means that and that means that, which proved to myself at least that I was still somewhat invested in the series, and for all that scene didn't necessarily go anywhere, I did like how it maybe played with the emotions of people that were already maybe half interested in the series. Now, I don't think that this is going to be the episode that convinces other people and changes their mind entirely, but at least based on the first 5 minutes or so, I was decently entertained by it. Now, we start to get into a little bit of the mystery that was uncovered, but I think in usual Velma style, we kind of jump about a bit, and unfortunately, they are retreading some things that happened in other Scooby-Doo properties, especially with Fred. The issue is that they're just not doing it as well, and I know people say that that's my opinion, that's this, that's that, but I think when you're dealing with something like having high expectations from parents, when you're dealing with stuff where maybe your parents aren't as reciprocated of your emotions as you are, I personally consider that I've kind of lived through that in my personal life, and so when that happened in Mystery Incorporated, it really got me in the feels and genuinely made me a bit emotional at times. Whereas with this, I was getting the same kind of reflex, like, oh, poor Fred, but ultimately it felt too cartoonish, if that's even a word that I can use. I guess that's maybe doing a disservice, because again, I'm comparing it to Mystery Incorporated, which did this infinitely better. It just seemed a bit too outlandish, a bit too childish, actually, I'll say that much, in that this is a sad scene, so let's ramp up the sad music, and let's shove in your face how sad it is, and instead of giving us the nuance of the writing, of subtlety, of even that little bit of animation, the kind of changes to facial expressions. I mean, there is that old saying that the best on-screen performances haven't been done by actors, but they've actually been done by a group of animators, and I absolutely agree with that. It's just, and for all I love the animation in this series, I think in certain times, they're not really doing it justice, but then again, for all it was done by animators in terms of best performances, I suppose if the actors aren't really giving it their all, then there's very little that the animators can do to change that, you know what I mean? All they can really do at a certain point, especially when you're dealing with more celebrity actors, it's like they have to blend to them as opposed to vice versa. So I don't really blame anyone for that particular situation. It's just I'd prefer new original stories within this universe as opposed to having something to compare it to constantly. But one of the things that I do like about this is that initial relationship between Daphne and Velma. I think they're setting it up, and a great friend of the channel, Kayla, Scooby in the Know, made an absolutely fantastic point on Twitter. I'll leave her account details in the description. And that was that she'd rather see maybe less of the Daphne and Velma relationship type thing and more of the rebuilding of friendships. And I think I had to respectfully agree and disagree with that at the same time. Obviously, beautiful points, but even that, I was like, well, we've kind of already seen that in Morgan Baden's book series, and it does it infinitely better there. But then the more I kind of sat on that train of thought, I was a bit like, well, surely that's the blueprints that this show could have followed from. And as much as I am cynical, I would like to say not as many people read as really should do. So I think there's going to be a lot more eyes on this show than there was on Morgan Baden's book series, which is a great shame because it is such an underrated book series. So I wouldn't necessarily mind if they retread it here, but I'm liking at least where they're initially going from. It's kind of like a halfway house in terms of the Daphne and Velma relationship for me. I'm there for it, and there are moments where it's really good, but then I think there are moments where they just kind of make a joke on it, and again, they just make it seem a bit silly in all honesty. And it's kind of like, I feel like they're playing into the Scooby franchise's perception of an LGBTQ plus relationship in that it hasn't really been explored. We've got implications within Mystery Incorporated, sure, and James Gunn wanted to do it 20 years ago, but it's tiptoeing around like the whole universe is like that. There's obviously like some bright sparks in terms of that representation, not the characters themselves necessarily, but I think that Daphne's mums are quite a good example of it just being a thing and it's normal, which I quite like. Whereas I think this is almost so overplayed, and I don't necessarily mind that, but you do get the impression that if it was a Fred show and he had a crush on Daphne, they'd already be together and it would just be, oh yeah, now we're together. So I kind of feel like they're dragging on a bit too much, but I mean, if they do something good with it, they do something good with it. It's just at this point in the show, the last thing I think we need is to be treading water when it's really time to ramp up the plot and just to decide who the murderer is at this point. And we do get that. There are things that I question. So Velma gets, I'm just going to say it, a way of communicating with the killer. And you can guess what that is. It's a phone, right? And so she does the only Velma thing that she's done for a while now. So she uses the background noise, she uses the kind of things that she hears on the other end of the phone to deduce where the killer is. So pretty good of Velma. It didn't really take a genius, but at the same time, it's Velma investigating for clues, finding things out, and she does it pretty well. And there's even a little bit of disguise. I don't know if that's too spoilery, but yeah, Velma basically does some pretty good detective work within the first quarter of this, although it's then overshadowed by the fact that she gets herself into some outrageous situation where she's far away from a lot of people. Even if she did find out something, she couldn't act on it, and that's when she chooses to find out where the murderer is. And it's kind of like, so you give us a bit of Velma, you give us a bit of that detective work, and then she just does one of the stupidest things that anyone could possibly do by basically making your location, letting yourself known, whilst in a position where you can't do anything about it. And it's like, come on, at least make it make sense, you know what I mean? So that really did annoy me, and I don't know. I just think it wasn't really Velma, which I know a lot of people are saying, but it was Velma, and then she got a bit stupid with it. But there is some nice moments between this Velma, shall we say, and Daphne. My issue is, I think this is more episode 3-4 stuff. I don't know. I mean, it's not inherently a bad trait. I can connect it that it's bad, and I can tell you guys it's bad, but at the end of the day, is this being a bit of a meandering episode a deal breaker? I don't think so. It does take me out a bit, because I think back to some of my favourite TV shows of all time, and think Daredevil Season 3. You get to Season 3, everything's kicking into motion, and then you get an exposition episode as the penultimate episode. Say Stranger Things, for example, season 2, everything is about to kick off, and then you get a weird, bizarre spin-off setup that doesn't end up happening as like the penultimate episode. So TV shows that are of good quality do have meandering kind of plot lines that derail things a bit. And this isn't even that bad here, because this isn't even a penultimate episode. But I just wish that they amped up the storyline a bit more. A bit more story and jokes on top of it, as opposed to a load of jokes leading up to a story. I think Millie said that best. But this is the first episode that I actually cared about the characters, because I think in a situation where, and this is why I think I'm saying I wish this was earlier, they get into a social situation where, for all they are exploring and they're investigating, it is ultimately a social episode where the characters are bonding. Maybe people meet that they haven't met before, and so we get to learn more about the whole town's dynamic, really. It's a pretty decent world-building episode, in all honesty. I think the fact that it's taken this long to get any bit of characterization is kind of poor, but like I said, like, if this episode, for all it hasn't fully landed for me now, if this is going to be what makes me fearful in the last episode when maybe the killer confronts them, then I'm for it, right? And there is a moment in this that I see absolutely going crazy on TikTok. And at the end of the day, can you blame them for including that? I really don't think so. And I think back in the day, a lot of views used to be on YouTube, and they still are, you know, when you think about people like Mr. Beast. But before that, they used to be on Facebook. And I think now, if you have a show that has TikTokable moments or TikTokable audio, I think that pays dividends for the marketing department. So I don't know if they included it for that reason, but if they did, then they've done pretty well. In fact, there's two. There's one that's a bit like a meme. Think Wednesday Dance, or think what's his name? Zola, the Zola dance from Captain America, well, the Captain America and Falcon show. And then there's another one, which is, it's actually really got me. That was a great moment when a little bit of a throwback happens in this episode. Was it complete nostalgia bait? 100%. But I think because they left it for so long, it wasn't just something that they plopped in episode 1 or 2 to let people know, hey, look, we remember this. Hey, look, we're doing this. It's okay. I think it earned leaving it too late. So that's what I'll say about that. Was it masterful television? Absolutely not. But I do think it was an earned moment, and I did enjoy it. So if you've seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about, but I actually did enjoy it. I don't know what other people think about it. I don't know if people think it's disrespectful to harken back to something classic, but I honestly did quite enjoy it. Unfortunately, what plagues this episode, as always, are the social commentary that Velma tries to do. And it's about sexism, which obviously I'm not a fan of the notion that if you're not a group affected by something, you can't speak on it, because I think you can speak on whatever you want to speak about. But because I've personally never experienced the type of things that Velma alleges in her kind of, she has like a rant or some type of weird like epiphany moment, I'm not comfortable commenting on that. The thing is, I don't dispute it or agree with it either way, just because I physically can't. You know, I'll leave that to women or other things like that. But my issue is, it's just, it was meant to be a joke. It was framed as funny, and yet it wasn't funny. It got in the way of the plot, and frankly, I think it just went on a bit too long. So I think it's such a shame. Every time I come out from watching these episodes, I think if it wasn't for Velma, I think it would have a half-decent show on the hands. And I'm talking about writing. And obviously I like the animation already. I like the music already. But I think if it wasn't for Velma, I actually think this has a chance of being a more than decent show. Maybe that's being a bit too generous, but she's just an awful person. And I think she's being framed as the best person in the series. And that's a real problem for me, because if the show can't even acknowledge that she's an awful person, then where's the character arc? Where's the growth? I think it's just going to be the end of the series, and all the other characters, who are pretty good people by and large, are going to be the ones to go, oh, I'm sorry, Velma, we should have seen it from your perspective. You were right all along. And I just don't think that that's true, and I don't know how many other people will think that that is true, because she's just not a very likable character. So yeah, that's kind of it really. Not much else to say about this episode. I will say I did think towards the end that it was gonna steal a joke right off of Be Cool Scooby-Doo, but it doesn't, which I was kind of upset about in a way, because I think maybe it would have worked slightly better in this show. Like, not that Be Cool Scooby-Doo did it bad, but I think in terms of the context and how much more hated this is than Be Cool, it possibly would have landed a bit better. But honestly, I've been watching so much Be Cool Scooby-Doo lately that it maybe didn't do this episode any favours, because Be Cool Scooby-Doo is such a hilarious show that maybe that's why I found it a bit harder to laugh at stuff in this episode. Although I did laugh a few times, so maybe that says more about me than the show itself. So thank you so much for watching. As usual, we're going to have an Easter egg video out to do with this episode, and also Milly's reaction. So if you do want to see that, then please like, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.